you hear me now? Yeah. I tell you, it is so good to be back here at Oxon. We feel so much involved. Thank you for including us in this 200th anniversary. You know, they say the first 100 years are the hardest. We'll find that out from Betty's aunt, who, if she's still around in June, will be 103. So, and she's still quite feisty. In fact, we were at her 102nd birthday, and she was flirting with some of the guys there. So, I mean, she's still like There's another, talking about age, there's a dear, dear lady in my church who's 88 years old. Her birthday's in March as well. And she walks with a cane, and she drives a two-seater Audi sports car. She's one of my favorites. Again, we are delighted to be here on this celebration. I think of pastors gone by, and I'm having a senior moment because I can't remember the name of the pastor whose photograph, the first photograph in the hallway. I can't think of his name right now because I want to. But again, he was one of the earlier pastors. And then I remember Pastor Soper, who was here. Many of you may remember Jack. He's 80. Many of you remember the 8 years of Bill Raper, who was my secretary when I was chair of Equitable Compensation. You remember Pastor Sandy. And of course, I was here for 8 years, and now we have Pastor Balderas. But the homily title is Thanking God for the Unexpected. Amen. And there are things that happen in our lives that are quite unexpected. I don't think that the early founders of Oxon Hill ever thought that the original white frame church about a block and a half away from here would burn. But it did. And from those ashes came this building in 1949, the same year I came on the scene. Then you added your transepts here. And then as you continued to grow, you added the educational wing in 61. The cross and the balcony is from the old church. Going back now to the last 2 or 3 pastors, as we look at the unexpected appointment of Pastor Sandy, your first woman. And even today, women still have a hard time in ministry. But yet she broke the gender barrier and did a great job with her spirit, with her leadership, and her personality. She added a lot to this church, and you grew from her. Then by George, you got this guy by the name of John Warren, a former Anglican, a frustrated Catholic, who comes here with all this highfalutin stuff. I stayed here 8 years. You're the second longest appointment I've had. My longest was really 10 years. 10 years. And during those 10 years, I met Betty, and we were married in that church by our good friend, the late Joseph Shelton Pollock, Father Pollock. And then, sometime later, again, an unexpected thing happened. You received your first Hispanic pastor, who comes with gifts and graces that only he can bring. Now again, we have all gone through our trials and tribulations, our acceptances and our non-acceptances. Because some things that we think is ordinary and normal and everyday is quite normal and everyday for us. But what it's called is learning. We have something to bring to the table, and that's why I like to have meetings around round table, so there's no head or foot at the table. And so again, from Pastor Taylor through Warren through Balderas, Oxon Hill has grown. Not just numerically, but I think spiritually. And so that now brings us to the text, because I was told that you do follow the lectionary, which I'm glad about. You didn't tell me how many minutes I have, so I'm going to take my time. Because normally at Concord-St. Andrews, I've got to get out in 59 minutes and 37 seconds. Because there is another sacrament that has been added to our list of sacraments, and it's called the sacrament of coffee hour. The saving goodness of God and the need for men and women to accept that goodness in trusting and faithful ways are the themes of today's readings. We find an affirmation of God's benevolent care of those who place their well-being in God's hands. An affirmation of God's unyielding love. And I think the kids really stole my thunder when they were singing about love. And I was thinking to myself, now how am I going to follow that? But they paved the way for me with that wonderful anthem that they gave. And yet, although God's love may be imperishable, it's capable of being frustrated by human pride and faithlessness, so that its intended effects are shunted aside. You read from Romans, Paul's letter to the church at Rome, chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. But we could spend all day talking about Paul's understanding of God and trying to unpack the terms he uses in that letter. What does it mean by faith? What does it mean by justification or grace or righteousness and sin? It really doesn't matter what Paul meant by those terms. No, not at all. The most important thing is, what matters is that what do they mean to you? What do they mean to you when push comes to shove? You need to make hard decisions that life brings your way. So, just for today, let's ignore all the theological jargon and go for the big picture that's in our lessons. In some way, all Paul's letters are simply concerned with how you and I live daily, how we live weekly, how we live monthly, how we live yearly as disciples, as learners, as followers of Christ. And so Paul writes for us about the character of Jesus the Christ and the character of those who follow Jesus and call themselves Christians. That character, beloved, comes down to one thing: agape. Love. Divine love. Jesus told us, showed us what his life was all about. It was about God's love. And then we can go to John 3:16, which writes, God so loved the world, not the church, but he loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. I don't like that past tense, that he gave. It's not a done deal once and for all. God continues to give again and again and again. And thank God he does. And so we are receivers of God's grace and God's gift. We become like Christ when we exhibit divinity to the extent that we exhibit God's love. It becomes our character. We have a peace. A peace that only God and God alone can give. So, what does that mean for you sitting here today? What wisdom does it have for a 200-year-old church tomorrow? The wisdom is about the word practice. Practice. I remember hearing a story of a guy getting in a cab in New York City. And he asked the cab driver, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? And the cab driver responded, practice, practice, practice. Well, I'll turn that around. How do you get to heaven? Practice, practice, practice. It's about saying that you are a Christian, and it's another thing living it out from day to day. And I'm here to tell you, after 41 years of ministry, it ain't easy. That's our mandate. That's our call. That's what we must be about to do. St. Paul tells us that we need not worry. What we need to do is to act. We need not be able to define justification. We only need to put legs under our faith. We don't need to be afraid. We simply need to love. Paul goes on to tell us that our practice starts with suffering. Suffering willingly, patiently. suffering in itself is good. I mean, I do not like pain. I really don't. But as long as you live and breathe and have your being, there are going to be ups and downs in life. Who was it, Cicely Tyson, that says life ain't no crystal stairs, crystal picnic? She got that right. It isn't. Because as long as you live and breathe, there are going to be ups and downs. And the only way to beat that is to die young and start pushing up daisies. And I've said many times from this pulpit, I'm a very religious person. I really am, Brother Miguel. But I'm not homesick. Yeah, I want to be around for a while. Somebody asked if I was going to retire. I said, not at 62, I'm not. Because love pays attention. Whenever it is in the presence of injustice, or hate, or abuse, or prejudice, or hunger, or need, love endures. God's love endures. With daily practice, love becomes our character. Because we are loved, there is hope. Thanks be.